right, good morning, boys and girls. Today we are going to be talking about setting. And setting tells us when or where something happens. So, for example, my setting right now is at my apartment. It is March, it is the morning, and it is the year 2020. While we're reading today, I also encourage you to think about some of the things that we learned earlier in the week, like asking questions or making predictions. So feel free to pause this video at any time and make predictions or ask questions about what's going on. Today we are going to be reading The Brilliant Deep, Rebuilding the World's Coral Reefs. And this story is by Kate Messner and Matthew Forsyth. So just looking at the cover, it looks like our setting is going to be underwater, maybe in the ocean. So let's read and find out. It starts with 1. One night, after a full moon, the corals begin to spawn, releasing first one, then millions of tiny lives, until the waters swirl like a snow globe. See a crab there, some coral reef. Some become food for hungry fish. Some are washed into the deep sea. Some drift into the currents until they come to rest, not too deep, on the ocean floor. If one is lucky, it lands in a place where it can grow. This one will begin a coral reef. That one right there. So it looks like our setting is still underwater. Ken Niedermeyer grew up near Florida's Kennedy Space Center, watching America race towards the moon. Before men took off in rockets, Ken's father worked at NASA as an engineer. Ken watched his father's team send some unmanned rockets, Little Joe, Redstone, Atlas, towards the stars. Men followed Alan Shepard, John Glenn. It seemed like just about anything might be possible if you set your mind to it. So this page told me that they were at the Florida's Kennedy Space Center. So I'm going to write down Florida's Kennedy Space Center. And we also see that our settings can change throughout the story. Sometimes they stay the same, but sometimes they can change. Let's see if it changes back. But Ken's dreams weren't in the stars. He loved the ocean. So let's stop and make a prediction. Maybe we're going to stay at the Space Center, or maybe we're going to go back to the ocean. Stop and think about it for a minute. He watched TV shows about underwater explorer Jacques Cousteau. That doesn't look like our TVs, does it? He visited the beach whenever he could, swimming far out to a world of angelfish and sea stars. The reefs of the Florida Keys teemed with life. They painted the ocean floor fire red and murky gold. How could the reefs grow so large? What made all the different colors and shapes? How could such tiny creatures build such elaborate homes of rock? Elaborate, complicated, fancy, nice. So this page told me that they were in the reefs of the Florida Keys. So it sounds like they're still in Florida, but now they are on the reefs in the Florida Keys. So I'm going to write that down for my setting. Ken learned to scuba dive and began collecting fish to keep and study at home. At one point, he had 30 aquariums in his bedroom, all bursting with life. See how much life there in those aquariums right here? All over the place. Ken's favorite place was always out on the reef, until things began to change. One summer, hotter than the rest, Ken noticed the corals were losing their color, and there weren't as many fish. So I noticed something with the time. They said that it's the summertime, so I'm going to write down summer as a part of my setting. And it was hotter than the rest, so we know this is going to be a very hot summer. Looks like he's investigating. The sea urchins had started to die. They are the gardeners of the reef, tiny groundskeepers who control the algae. But Ken didn't know that at the time. Even scientists didn't understand what an important role the sea urchins played until they were gone. So it looks like we have our problem. The sea urchins are gone. Ken watched his favorite place in the world begin to fade away. The reefs were dying, and it seemed like there was nothing he could do to save them. So let's quick pause and make a prediction. Do we think Ken is going to be able to save them? I think so. But one day that changed. Ken was all grown up, operating a live rock farm in the Florida Keys. So we're still in the Florida Keys for our setting. Live rocks aren't really alive. They're rocks covered with algae, mollusks, sponge, and other invertebrates. So they have things that are living on them. They're used in saltwater aquariums as decoration and to filter waste from the water, turning poisons like ammonia and nitrates into harmless compounds. This makes the water safer and healthier for everything that lives in it. So they keep the water safe. And growing them is really just a matter of patience, placing rows of bare rocks on the ocean floor and waiting for the marine life to move in. So we're waiting for little living things to move in onto these rocks. One moonlit night, a nearby coral colony spawned, and a few of those delicate lives found their way to Ken's rocks. They grew into staghorn corals. Staghorn corals are protected, illegal to take from the ocean floor, but the law says if a coral colony grows on a live rock farm, the owner can keep it. So it's illegal to take them, but it is his farm, so he is able to. Ken could have sold his specimens to someone with a saltwater aquarium, but instead, he and his daughter had an idea. As the corals grew, they cut off pieces and attached those pieces to other rocks. They discovered they could use those first colonies to grow more and more corals. So they're growing the corals. Looks like they're still on the Keys. They're in a boat now. They're not underwater, but they're still on the water. What would happen if someone grew a coral colony and then tried to plant it on a dying reef? Would it grow? Could that colony help rebuild the reefs Ken loved? Could a reef come back to life? Ken made plans to go to the reef, where he'd loved diving as a kid, to find out. He selected his coral colonies. He loaded his scuba gear and supplies and set out for the reef. So he's going down to the reef. They're on a boat right now, but they're going to be going underwater again. One hopeful dive, one optimistic experiment. He thinks things are going to go good. He's optimistic. 6 small coral colonies, each one the size of a hand with the fingers stretched, glued on a limestone surface where a reef had once flourished and was now bleached and barren. Would they grow? What do you think? Are they going to grow or are they not going to grow? I think they're going to. I'm optimistic, just like Ken. Ken and his friends came back to check on the coral colonies. Again and again, each month, they had grown larger. It was too soon to say if the reef would fully recover, if the fish would return, but it was a beginning. So they needed patience. They weren't sure. Ken started a group called the Coral Restoration Foundation, a small army of volunteers on a mission to restore the reefs. They hang bits of coral on special underwater trees and lines where the corals can grow. When the corals are large enough, these farm-raised colonies are loaded onto boats with volunteers, dive equipment, and tools. Then it's out to a new home on one the coral will help to build. One the corals will help to build. Volunteers take great care with this homecoming. They search for just the right spot, a place where each coral colony can hold on once it's grown enough to attach to the reef on its own. Divers scrape off any algae. They use chipping hammers, scraping, and banging to get the surface even and smooth. Then, with a careful dab of epoxy, just the size of a Hershey's Kiss, volunteers attach the coral colonies, piece by piece, arm by arm, hoping they will grow on their own. Look, Natalie, you're famous. Your last name's here. Today, the transplants are not only surviving, but also reproducing. Ken's group has planted tens of thousands of coral colonies on reefs in the Florida Keys, and now he's working with other countries, teaching people how to grow corals of their own to save the reefs they love too. So they're saving them. Our setting is still underwater. Tonight the moon will be full and bright, the corals may spawn, and if one tiny life lands just at the right spot, another new colony will grow, and then another, and another, and another. It starts with one. Alright, boys and girls, so remember, setting tells us where and when something is happening, and make sure when you're reading you're also asking questions and making predictions. Enjoy!